We're going to chat for about 20 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. Kelly's going to tell me when the 20 minutes is up. So I'm going to ask just a few pre-prepared questions, and I've been interested, and we've talked about this before, but what first got you interested in philanthropy?
Thanks, Ronnie, and really love to see you all, and thank you, Anna, for your kind words as well. I'm a huge fan of the Community Foundation movement. It's very hard to organise generosity. I mean, you mentioned that British people don't often like to talk about money, but actually it's not just money, it's morals as well. And you put the Venn diagram of money and morals together, and there's not many Brits want to hang out in that overlap, so I think it's really hard. So I, applaud anyone who's willing to sort of be publicly generous and talk about it. You don't even have to like the word philanthropist, it's a funny old word. I often make the joke that my mum thinks I study stamp collecting, and it's only half of it really, because it's such a tricky word to understand what to say. So how did I get into philanthropy? I was a beneficiary of philanthropy. I mean, we're all beneficiaries of philanthropy in different ways, and we'll probably get onto that later about how it's everywhere and you can't really avoid it. I sometimes tell my students, can you get through a day without somehow benefiting from a gift in the past or in the present? But I was about 15, thinking I need to get out of the situation. I think perhaps I've got some brains and I'm not able to use them as well as I'd like to in the situation I'm in Leeds. And I found myself winning a scholarship to go to a college in Wales called Atlantic College, which is perched on a cliff in a castle. Someone nodding knows it. I mean, it's proper fantasy stuff. They call it Hogwarts for hippies these days. It was amazing. But what was particularly striking for me in terms of my philanthropy journey is that my scholarship was funded by one philanthropist, a couple, Morris and Hilda Lang, as in the construction, and they came to see us. So there were about 12 of us on these scholarships in Britain, but most people were kind of a pooled fund, didn't quite know where the money had come from. But I knew because it was embodied in these two people who came once a year, in the 2 years I was there, to meet me and the other person they funded. And I'd never met people of wealth before, but also people who were generous of wealth. And they were so interested in us and what we were doing and how we were getting on with our studies and what we wanted to do in our future lives. And that was my first experience of philanthropy, and that's stayed with me since. The kind of people who do this have a genuine connection. They're not out for the other kind of things that might come with being a philanthropic. They're doing it from the heart and because they want to make the world a better place. And I stayed in touch. I sent a letter every kind of new year just to let them know how I was getting on. I then went on in my first job to be a fundraiser. I think many of us have had that experience because there's more jobs in fundraising than many others in the sector. So I then was on the side of asking for money. And again, got really curious. Why did they give and they didn't? Why have they, having a better experience here? So I moved slowly from doing it to studying it. And that's how I found myself 20 years ago, having completed a PhD in contemporary philanthropy and setting up the UK's first academic centre on philanthropy at the University of Kent. And it's been an absolute joy to run it for 20 years. We've taught lots of people, written lots of books, done lots of reports and so on. And now I'm moving back into a kind of more mainstream academic job, but still very much a champion and promoter of more and also better giving.
Thank you. You just alluded to a second ago.
Is often referred to philanthropy as being hidden in plain sight. And referred to this quite a lot when I've heard you in different contexts. Do you want to explain a little bit more what you mean?
Sure. So Ronnie's asking me about this idea that philanthropy is hidden in plain sight. And I think, we know when we bought something, we've literally got the receipts, we've been into the shop or we've been online. You know when you've had that kind of commercial transaction. You know when you've paid tax. You don't always know exactly what your tax has been spent on, but you know that some part of your money has gone in a tax, and you know that other people have also paid their tax. Philanthropy is not as simple as that. You can't see either the people who are paying it or the people who are spending it or the beneficiary. It's kind of it's all around us, but that makes it almost easier to overlook. I sometimes think do you remember when the European Union used to fund things and there'd be like a flag with the blue flag with the yellow stars on it, and at least you knew that there'd been some money. But we've heard already from Anna about some of the projects she worked on. When I was chatting to people outside, I was hearing about all kinds of amazing work all over Bristol, and it won't have that kind of thumbprint, that logo that this has had. Somebody has decided that rather than keep the money for themselves or give it all to their kids or put it in the bank or to go and buy nice things for themselves with it, because they're the only things really you can do with money, they've chosen the only other option, which is to give it away. and it's just less easy to kind of get hold of and see because it's so intangible. So those kind of things that are hidden in plain sight, when I challenge my students, can you get through a day? Well, I suppose the easiest ones to spot are the ones that are maybe more kind of infrastructure buildings, so kind of physical. So I'll say things like, have you been to the theatre? Have you been to any hospital built before 1948? Have you any university built in the past? These all only exist because people gave money. Churches, synagogues, temples, all of them were built originally and continue to be maintained because people have said, I'm willing to contribute my private wealth for some form of public good. So there's those sort of physical buildings that you could put a logo on, but you can't put a logo on the bit of the COVID vaccine that was done because people donated, and not just when the pandemic happened, for all those years before, had supported scientists, maybe given them the scholarships to study earlier, or maybe had made sure the labs were fully functioning so that when things hit, they were ready to move as quickly as they did. If you have any loved ones who have diabetes or had cochlear implants, you have two good examples where it was philanthropic money that came in at the right moment and made sure that the research developed so those illnesses could be dealt with. We all know that Cancer Research UK, the biggest fundraising charity in the country, they can always differentiate where there's commercial work in these fields. Of course, pharmaceuticals are working in them, the government's funding them, but in the mix, there's always some private donors. So I challenge you to think the things that you need or the things that you want, like going to the theatre or what have you, where have other people in the past done something that we're now benefiting from today? And how, therefore, can we carry on to pay that forward? Because if we've been the beneficiaries, it's rather uncomfortable. We want to even it out and reciprocate. And I think that's what philanthropy really is. It's like a really big, long-term giving and getting. And it's really nice to be part of that. And we just want to keep an eye on where we've benefited, perhaps not noticed it, and make sure we keep paying it forward.
So just building on that, the culture you've alluded to in Britain, where there's a slight reticence to be seen to be a philanthropist, how do we square that then? How do we both celebrate and make more visible philanthropy alongside the reticence that perhaps we culturally have towards philanthropy more generally?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Ronnie, and I think it's because we need to chip away at this idea that if you talk about it, you're somehow showing off. And that's a very easy critique to make of somebody, and it shuts them down quite quickly because nobody wants to think they're showing off. But if none of us ever talk about it, we can't establish a social norm. And people don't do things if they don't think that that's what's done. And we don't want people thinking, well, am I the only one? Am I the only one doing this? Is it unusual? Is it weird? Am I being duped? And it's not the case because it's very common to give. I mean, a majority of people give small amounts, every year, and many, the top end, about 90% or so. It's very normal for people to give away some of their wealth. You wouldn't know that from the way people talk about it. And it's one of the biggest differences with our colleagues in the US. Now, in the US, philanthropy is at least twice as big. And people often point to explanations like, oh, that's because they have a small estate. Or that's because, they'll come up with some American records. There's a difference in tax, which isn't actually true. Every donation here is tax effective too. What's the real reason? I think it's because it's culturally normal, accepted, and even celebrated that people give, and they're willing to talk about it. And I had quite a funny experience when I first started working at the Institute for Philanthropy, which was my kind of gateway job between fundraising and studying philanthropy. And there was many Americans involved in the Institute for Philanthropy. And one of them, it was his first time attending in person a trustees meeting, and he'd been to a dinner party the night before. And he said, Beth, he said, I sat down and it was a philanthropy event, so I thought it would be fine. I said to the person next to me, hey, so what do you support? And he said, I might as well have mentioned their body odour, they come the way they shrivel so much. We don't talk about that, that's really not done. And it was a real quick lesson for him to learn that people, it's very understated, very under the table. And I do think that's problematic. It's not easy to find ways to talk about it, but the more we all do, the more people can say, actually, I'd like to support that too. How do I get to that? Can you make a connection for me? And it's one of the reasons that fundraisers, for example, will encourage people to put their names on things. It's not because they think that person particularly wants to see their name on the building. They're usually far more interested in what's happening inside the building. People want to support the work, but if you're willing to be identified with the cause, that's incredibly helpful, because then the charity can say, look, we have this support, and it kind of sends out almost a due diligence message to other people. And if people know that surname, it gives them quite a lot of confidence. So there's a real, it's almost adding value to the gift. People have given a monetary gift, but they're also giving a gift of sort of reputational and social capital value too. So I do think that's one of the biggest changes we need to make. And Ronnie mentioned one of the books series that I've been involved in. It's called Why Rich People Give, which is rather, it does what it says on the tin, kind of a Ron Seal title. But what we've done is we've studied a cohort of people every 10 years. So that TV programme 7 Up? It's kind of like that for philanthropy, and not on telly, but in the book. But other than that, very similar. So Theresa Lloyd, who some of you might know, is based in Bath. She did the first edition by herself in 2004, and that's when I was just doing my PhD and got to know her at that point. So 10 years on, she said, Beth, do you want to help me do the update? So 2012, we went back and restudied and surveyed and brought in some new people, and that book came out called Richer Lives. And then this year, we brought in another person, Roger Davies, who's a good philanthropy expert, and I've updated it again. So 3 cohorts of studying people. And one of the main, I'm getting to the point, one of the main findings of that is people are more willing to talk about it. People say, yes, I see it in the newspapers, yes, I see others discuss, and that makes it feel okay. So let's hope we have more of that.
Thank you. I'm interested in your views as to whether and in what ways you think philanthropy has changed from the time that you've been involved in and studying it.
Yeah, so this is when Ronnie and I might disagree, which is always good for a talk, because you don't want to be exactly the same. I don't think philanthropy's changed a lot. I think people have always been generous. I mean, I'm no historian, but I do love reading the history of philanthropy, and I've got colleagues who are historians, and they will show us that, back to the Romans and probably, further back to the Greeks, and that's where the word comes from, philanthropy, love of humankind. People have always chosen, some people have always chosen to give away some of their wealth. You can see names inscribed on the bathhouses in sort of Roman times, so this is not, not entirely new. I think what changes is the context. So when no one else was providing health or education, you either bought it, the very tiny percentage of the population who could do that, or everyone else was relying on donors. If you needed accommodation, if you needed poor relief. So of course, as times moved on and we moved into the 20th century and there was more state-organised provision of these things, philanthropy doesn't stop and never stopped. When the NHS was introduced, there was a wonderful survey that showed that 98% of people thought there'd be no more donations needed for healthcare. And of course, it's still one of the main, if not the main, cause, because people moved on from things like primary care to hospices and to preventive care and so on. So there's always more we can do for other people. And one of my American colleagues, who's a professor of philanthropy, has this lovely phrase where he says, philanthropy will always exist because things will always go wrong and things could always be better. And I actually think you can't really put it better than that. Things will always go wrong and things could always be better. So whatever the state steps up to do in the sort of glory days, I suppose, of the welfare state starting, however much they did, there's always more you could do. So I think my answer to the question is, it's not philanthropy that changes so much as the context around it. And it's almost like the sand between the stones and the glass that kind of moves and changes. And it's often quite time limited. So they'll invest in something until perhaps the model's proven, and then the state might take it on, or there might be a market solution, or other donors take it on, and then it moves on to the next thing that needs doing to improve life. But I think you have a slightly different take. What's your take?
I want to answer a different question to the one, which is how the role of philanthropy might have changed. And I think, I've said this before, but certainly in the time that I've been with Quartet, the state has effectively, visibly disappeared from the lives of many people. There were community workers, there were youth workers, there were public health workers, there were community midwives. Those are no longer there now. I remember a time when any area or estate you went in Bristol, there would be the Bristol City Council logo, and they'd be running the youth centres. Now there's not a youth centre, I don't think, in Bristol that's run by the City Council or that isn't dependent on philanthropy and voluntary sector effort and activity to make it continue. And so for me, that's about a changed role of philanthropy, that philanthropy, if you like, the disappearing state, has had to step into space and in areas where previously it wouldn't have been considered an area in which it had a role to play. So I guess...
How very disappointing, we're not going to have a row. That would be far more fun to watch a row.
Maybe when we get to the Q&A, we can have an argument on that. But I think that for me is the distinction about the role of philanthropy and the need for urgent primary care philanthropy. I don't know if that's a reflection you've had in what philanthropy has provided that's perhaps more immediate or more urgent, more primary need meeting now than perhaps it had been previously.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you meet one philanthropist, you've met one philanthropist. I mean, some are very happy. I was chatting to some people outside saying, much as you wish the state was funding youth services or whatever it might be, if it's not being funded, it needs doing. People are willing to do it because they can see the need and they want to help. There are others who would say, no, I'm not doing frontline work. I'm very much kind of root causes, systemic, even basic research. So I think, all philanthropy is good, in my view. And sometimes within the world of academic study, people like to sort of promote one particular kind of philanthropy. And this has got a long history as well. Sort of charity organisation society saying, do this kind and don't do that kind and don't encourage dependencies and all the rest of it. And I think, who are we to be the philanthropy police? If you're giving money away, if you're being generous, then there's a role for different people. I think it's wonderful people are willing to step in, because actually, if you think about motivations, it's more motivating to do something extra, I would think. And I can't speak for everybody, but the research I've done over 20 years of studying philanthropies, people like to think they're adding value on top, something that wouldn't have otherwise been done. It's not very exciting if the government turns off the tap of funding for you to sort of turn it back on again and the net result is simply where you were before. So I actually really admire people who are willing to do that and say, even though there's no great net gain, I'm not willing to let the service drop. I think that's actually an incredibly noble kind of philanthropy. I suppose people then could maybe go for other solutions for that funding to be filled and then get back to being able to do the added value.
So is it the effective philanthropy, altruism movements at the McCaskill?
Yeah, so the EA, World Effective Altruists, if you've not come across those, and that comes into sort of some of the arguments I've been engaging with around critiques of philanthropy. So the effective altruists are very much, you have to do lots of calculations, get your calculator out and work out exactly how much bang for your buck, how many lives you'll save, how much quality of life you can add. And again, if that works for you, not the philanthropy piece, that's one way to do it, but it tends to be quite sort of evangelical. Everybody should do it that way. And if you're not got your calculator out, then you're not being a good enough philanthropist. And that's one of my worries, actually, that we start telling people, you have to sort of, it's almost like sitting a test or an exam. Are you good enough? And I remember doing an interview with a wonderful, very experienced and generous man for many decades who said, the way to get young people involved in philanthropy is to think of like an escalator and, moving staircase. He said there's a reason why the bottom step is flat. You want people to very easily get on and then move up. And perhaps you become more, sort of thoughtful and, have strategies and all the rest of it as you go on. And community foundations help us all to do that. And a thoughtful philanthropy is, of course, a good philanthropy. But let's not stop people stepping on in the first place by making it seem terribly difficult and complicated. If you don't have a theory of change, put your checkbook away, well, that's, not really going to help immediately. So I think that there's definitely a role for people coming in and then growing into their philanthropy life.
Thank you. I've been told that we're on for so it's
oh my goodness,
questions. I know. So it's kind of Q&A time, questions if people have got any particular questions they want
or disagree with us. I mean, this is, please feel free to say if you think you have a different view.
While people are summoning. Oh, great. We've got two down the front there. Helen, do you want to go first? And then William.
Yeah. When I was working at the Community Foundation a long time ago now, there was some research about that somebody had done an analysis of what makes a community a good giving community, the sort of amount of giving in a community. And I remember very well that Bristol ticked all the boxes. Mm-hmm. So it was going to be, it should be a really high giving community. And actually, when it was measured, it was a low giving community. So we had a lot of fun deciding why that might be, private schools and all this sort of thing, people giving small amounts to a lot of charities. Mm. But I wonder whether that research is kind of ongoing, whether there are still theories about, communities and what makes a good philanthropic community.
That's a great question, thank you. I think that it is useful to see what do you need in place, but I think you also need the demand side. So you can have the supply side, people who are sufficiently educated, aware of need, willing, often, people who come from a religious or kind of humanistic background. So all of those things are definitely correlated with more giving. But if they're not asked, if not presented with opportunities to help, it doesn't happen. And so shout out to all the fundraisers, because they're the ones who translate that altruistic intention into action. So I would suggest potentially, in that case, you can have all the characteristics in place, but without that demand side, so giving and asking, kind of two sides of the same coin, it doesn't translate. So the main reason that people give is because they were asked. And the main reason they don't give is because they weren't asked. And people often think it's to do with religion, it's to do with whatever. It's not, it's to do with being asked and being asked well. So I think that will probably, but no harm in building a community where those asks will land on more fertile ground.
Thank you. William?
Are there any particular sorts of pitfalls that philanthropists should be thinking about? Things that you've come across that where things don't go very well somehow?
Yeah, sure. So that's, again, a really thoughtful question. Thank you. So there's always the worry that we know what other people want. And I think the critiques of philanthropy are often focused on that concern that somebody's coming into a situation, perhaps it's not of the world they're trying to help, and they, with all the best intentions in the world, or not, are wrongly guessing what's needed. So it really comes down to power, doesn't it? And misuse power, however unintentionally. And there's been a lot of great developments in I'd say, the last sort of since the millennium, about bringing in people with lived experience, people from the communities, and making sure you do things with people rather than to them. And I think a lot of that can help solve a lot of these problems. I think we can also over-egg these issues and say it's all about power and it's all misdirected, and I worry about it swinging. But I think it's definitely worth being aware of these things and checking in and making sure. So you look at someone like Mackenzie Scott, whose money nearly always goes to somebody who is of themselves of that community. So somebody who's been through drug addiction, who's then running a drug addiction charity, for example, or mothers who've, had experiences and then are working with other mothers. So I think that's one good way. But then you're still only one person, aren't you? So your experience as an addict or a mother is not the same as other people. So it's not completely solvable, but I think being aware of it. Nobody wants to go back to the bad old days of Victorian philanthropists who were doling out bread and alms, whatever they thought was needed, and all the problems that caused. So I think we're definitely seeing more thoughtful philanthropy. I just worry that we go too far and critique philanthropists. You got it wrong, and then they think, gosh, I'd better not bother trying then. And that's no good. That doesn't lead us anywhere useful.
So we were fortunate enough to spend 4 years in America, and I learned a lot from working with the Gates Foundation there and philanthropy. And I just think, that culturally, Americans talk about philanthropy like we talk about the weather. So, and you're talking to the converted here in many ways. So what is it that you could tell us and ask us one thing that we can all do when we leave here today to encourage others to think about philanthropy in a way that's not so, I don't want to talk about it?
I mean, you made me laugh, and that's very true. Do you know what? I think talking about it in whatever way is comfortable, and the P word doesn't have to be used. I'm in favour of reclaiming it because I like it. I like its etymology of love of mankind. What's wrong with that? But if people want to talk about being generous, caring, sharing, concerned, there's other language that might feel more comfortable. And I think that's, or even talk about the causes being supported. That connects. So it's not about you as the donor, but about there's this amazing group, there's this amazing community group, or there's an amazing community foundation that's helped me do it. I think that can almost take the edge off it a little bit, because you're not talking about you anymore. You're talking about, there's this amazing woman running this project. The hours she puts in and the work and the impact it has. So again, talking about what you do, it goes back to the thing about the name on the building. It's not about the name, it's what's happening inside. So I think that would help, but I think we've a long way to go to get to that American culture of philanthropy, but anything we could do to move in that direction and make it just seem normal, that would be really helpful.
Thank you. And I think it was Joe who had a question.
Ask pretty much the same thing. We all know it's very difficult to ask people to give, and just wondered if you had any tips for that.
Yeah, how to ask people to give.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if I could just be permitted to say a little bit more about before that, I work a lot with Americans because that's where the biggest sort of academic-based census on philanthropy are, and they don't agree that everything's rosy and great there. There's plenty of difficulties asking for money. Just because they're more open doesn't mean they're completely open. And at the moment, I'm working with the Irish government on developing a national policy on philanthropy in Ireland, and they think Britain's got it all sorted. So it's not like you across in Britain where you all talk about philanthropy, it's so easy. In Ireland, we don't do it at all. So we've probably all got a comparison point where We think that they've got it sorted and we haven't. So I don't think Americans would, for example, feel it's all, you know, the money comes rolling in. The asking, I think again, it's about the work. You know, my PhD was called More Than Money, the social meaning of philanthropy. And I still stick to that it's not really about the money, it's about the work and the impact. And sometimes it doesn't even need money. It can be a gift in kind, it can be an introduction, it can be a testimony for, you know, encouraging others. So I think the more we talk about that, and the money is what's needed and the support's needed to get there, the easier it is for people to engage with it. I think, just to say one more thing, I think that sometimes we think of philanthropy as just being so huge, you know, the amounts involved, that therefore it's not me. And I was chatting to someone outside about, again, the Bill Gates situation, where of course it's extraordinary that one family, only one couple, they've given away, I think it's 40 billion, might even be 50 now over, you know, a couple of decades. But actually the whole US population is giving away 400 billion each year. And in the UK, the same thing's true, that generally the population is giving away far more than the handful of big names. So it's about saying, gosh, we all do this. And that goes back to the point that it's everywhere. You know, the theatre's got all these little donations as well as the big donations. So the more we can make it seem like everyone's playing their part, then the more it just becomes a bit more accessible.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. Hugh.
Would you agree that the hardest step on the sort of philanthropy journey is the first step, but that after that it can become quite addictive?
Absolutely, I think, absolutely. So there's this wonderful philosophy paper called What to Expect When You're Expecting, and it's all about the philosophical question, can anyone ever really imagine, can you ever answer a question about something really big and life-changing, like having a baby, which is the example they use there, moving to Australia, changing career, giving away millions? These are all things that you can't really have a sensible question about in advance, because doing it turns you into a different person. So the person who is thinking about moving to Australia is not the person who's there. The person who's thinking about having a baby is not the person who becomes a parent. And I think philanthropy is in the same category. Thinking about this in the abstract, it's very hard, especially to understand the benefits. Once you do it, you go, oh, okay, I've met all these interesting people, I feel better about myself, my life's got more purpose, my kids, you know, understand what the family money's for. But it's very hard to discuss it beforehand. So absolutely, the first step's the hardest, and that's why I think we shouldn't overcomplicate it or put up lots of barriers. Just get going, try, see what works. Again, one of my favourite interviews in the latest Rich People Give was a guy who said to me, he said, you can't teach people how to improve their golf club swing if they've never picked up a golf club. And I thought that was great. You know, if you've never done it, so let's help them pick up the golf club and then try and help them perfect it. I think there's one more.
Okay, there's one more. Andrew.
Do you think there is such a thing as a hierarchy of causes in philanthropy? And did your researchers suggest that there are people who you interview who do take that view?
So it's a one-word answer here.
No, I don't think there is. And I think, again, it goes back to not the philanthropy piece, whatever matters to you. And I think that each individual has things they care about more, and that tends to be because it's hit their life. So the critics who say it's about tax or power or ego or something, they haven't met in a philanthropist, because every time I've met a philanthropist, it's because something's happened to them. Usually sad, often from grief or bad experiences, sometimes good. Even the Rockefellers, you know, it was his grandson who died of scarlet fever, and that's why he set up the Rockefeller Institute. You know, if you go back and find the actual thing that kick-started it, it's usually something very personal. So, and then that's what's the top of the hierarchy for them, but we all have different life stories.
Ronnie, can I just...
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's just stay all night.
It's more of a story, but I went to a wedding down in Kent, and I sat next to a woman who was the chairman of the Florence Nightingale Society in London. And we got talking about various things, and she said, well, where do you come from? And I said, I come from Bristol. Oh, Bristol, she said, second only to London for philanthropy, she said, in the world. So that our reputation is greater than perhaps we really think. Yes.
Good.
Great. Well,
I'd just like to, well, you can understand why, as practitioners, we find Beth inspiring and a fantastic champion for all that we believe in, whether you're on the fundholder, the philanthropic side, or whether you're working as we are to engage and encourage and meet needs in the local area. So I'd just like you all to say thank you very much indeed for Beth for coming down and sharing your experience with us, which will be the first of an annual series of legends. Thank you very much. Bina's got a question, and then behind, I can't see, and Joe behind her.